It was one hell of a week in the Ukraine-Russian war. Two of the biggest strikes happened, one coming from Ukraine hitting Russian airfields, the other retaliation happening later on in the week with Russia retaliating on Kyiv. Here's what President Trump is now saying about this conflict.
Did the Ukraine drone strikes against the bombers inside Russia, the airfields, did that change your view at all of what Zelensky, the cards he has?
Well, they gave Putin a reason to go in and bomb the hell out of him last night. That's the thing I didn't like about it. When I saw it, I said, here we go. Now it's going to be a strike,
Are you worried that there might be a nuclear breakout with Russia, Ukraine? Are you worried that could...
I hope not. I think it's a war that would have never happened. If I were president, that wouldn't have happened. I certainly hope not.
Russia, Ukraine, where are you at today with the Senate sanction bills? There's been some reporting of the White House's,
well, I know the bill. I know the bill we're to see. I mean, if I think Russia will not be making a deal or stopping the bloodshed, 5 and 6 even, I've been saying 5 and 6 and now it's more, 1,000 a week soldiers being killed and people being killed, not just soldiers, people being killed, but largely soldiers being killed. I'd use it if it's necessary.
Wasn't that kind of casual? He also sounded very weary, right? I think he's realizing that he's coming to his wit's end as to what his charisma is capable of accomplishing. So he's resorting to his, tough talk that isn't as aggressive as it used to be. Danny, earlier on in the week, also was commenting on the Ukraine strike on Russia, and he explained how all of the hoopla and all the propaganda that was being put forth at first, because, originally Zelensky was claiming that they hit over 40 planes, but that ended up not being quite the number. It's more like 13, and some say as low as 10 planes. But here's Danny commenting on the whole unfolding of how it was being presented in the media.
Each one of those drones has a camera, and that camera records video, and that video is being used for this massive propaganda campaign. They seem to be crippling the flow of semi-trucks inside of Russia right now, because how is Russia supposed to trust semis that are driving on their roads, right?
Well, I'm sure that there's a lot of internal discussion going on, and they're trying to find out just how big is the scale of this. Were these the only ones? Are there more in there? It seems reasonable to suggest that this was only phase one, and that they would, if they're going to go to all that trouble, that there may well be phase two. But that, again, just shows you that no one is safe anywhere. Now, I will tell you, though, that while this is great video for the Ukraine side and is huge embarrassment for the Russians, it has damaged their bomber fleet, though apparently not as bad as what's being claimed by the Ukraine side. It hasn't done anything to change the front line dynamics, and the Russians are still continuing to move forth in the Sumy area, the Kharkiv area, Kupiansk, and then elsewhere on the eastern front, and that hasn't even slowed down yet. So I don't know that the Ukraine side can be too excited, because media victories don't equate to battlefield victories, and those dynamics are still in Russia's favor.
I thought that was so important that Danny pointed out that Ukraine isn't building up momentum here. That's not what happened with their strikes on the airfield. Actually, to the contrary, they overplayed their hand, saying that they were such a big accomplishment. Zelensky came out afterwards, we showed it on the show, how he was, just with his chest out saying how what an accomplishment it was. And Danny was giving the perspective that really it's not changing a thing. They are in the same place they still were. Yeah, they made some strikes, and yes, it was visually effective, but really on the ground it had nothing to do with making any change whatsoever. We also had Patrick Henningsen on, and he talked us through some of the transitions when Trump first came in, and where we are now, just months later, and what has occurred over that course of time. And it didn't take much time for things to drastically change.
Under Trump, the hope was, when he came in with a lot of goodwill under him, like a magic carpet, okay? And it was that Trump was going to bring this war to an end, come to some kind of a decent relationship with a major superpower like Russia. And somehow, this whole Zelensky road show is just going to have to be, this is the final season of Servant of the People. It's over, right? That was the hope, okay? He has extinguished and spent all of that goodwill in 4 months with no tangible results at all. And the problem is the U.S. can't shirk their duties as a world superpower. As the head of NATO, the U.S. cannot leave this to the devices of European smaller and lower and medium tier powers, because history has shown what happens when you do that. And unless the U.S. takes a decisive position with the other major superpowers to come to a stabilizing agreement, the potential for nefarious actors to fill the vacuum of power. And let me tell you, I do not see Trump as a strong leader right now. I see Donald Trump as very weak, okay? Very weak, without strategy, without any clear vision, no U.S. foreign policy, no grand strategy, nothing. It's just that you've got to bend to our will and do what we say. Otherwise, it's going to be trouble and I'm going to be upset. And if you don't submit to my will, that's not strategy. That's not policy. That's not foreign policy. So the U.S. needs to step up. If Trump can't do it intellectually, he's got to have a team around him that can pull that off. Not just this, they're balancing plates. They're balancing the Iran talks, plus the Israel-Gaza situation, plus Ukraine-Russia. So there's some big, important plates in the air right now, and they're very close to basically fumbling and dropping all of them.
You know, Patrick is voicing something that a lot of others are saying, that Trump actually doesn't have strategy. Jim Jatras was on the show earlier this week, and he explained that he thought that Trump is working and motivated by impulses rather than strategy, and how disastrous that is and how we're seeing it played out like that. Professor John Mearsheimer was also on this week, and he mentioned how his position now is changing in his mind as to what the possibilities are. He's a pretty measured guy, if you guys have seen him much. So he's not one to jump to histrionics in any situation. He has a very calm and thoughtful approach to everything. But things, because of all that's unfolding, are changing in John Mearsheimer's mind.
I used to think that there was hardly any possibility that this war would escalate to the nuclear level. Once it was clear that the Russians were not going to be defeated in eastern Ukraine, I relaxed with regard to this whole issue of nuclear escalation. But as I watch this war unwind at this point in time, I'm getting increasingly nervous that at some point nuclear weapons might be used. The Russians are angry. They are awfully angry. And you have more and more operations like this and the Kursk offensive. The incentives for the Russians to escalate are very great. And the Russians might very well think about using a nuclear weapon, especially in Ukraine, because Ukraine doesn't have the capability to retaliate. I'm not saying that that's likely. All I'm saying is that we're marching forward here into a world where the Russians are getting increasingly angry with us. They're getting increasingly desperate about where this one is headed over the long term. And when that kind of thing happens, states take risks. They pursue risky policies. So we do not want to underestimate the extent to which we're playing with fire.
You can see as the week was unfolding, all our guests are painting a very bleak picture. I mean, it's a familiar theme that we're hearing over and over again about people that it's their jobs basically to understand, to interpret, to analyze, and it's all being painted in what's being laid out before us. Danny and I came across this as something that we've talked about, and our guests have talked about often, is the desperation that the Ukrainian army is in. I want to show you the most recent initiative that the Ukraine army has come up with, building their army. This is the conscription officers, and that's like an Uber Eats delivery guy, and you can see him taking off his backpack because they ordered food from him, but not because they were hungry, not because they wanted food, because they want to build their army. And here you see them taking him away to join the army. That wasn't an isolated incident. We've shown you other clips over the course of time of different kidnappings, but the fact that they're luring them in, it's not just dark, it's sinister how they're tricking them into that they're doing their job, showing up, and this is what ends up happening. Now, let me ask you, what kind of soldier will this Uber Eats driver be? What ends up happening when he puts that uniform on? Is this really an effective way to build an army? What's the morale? You can only imagine what the attitude, and it's even not even a morale, but what happens once he's in there and there's others like him, And what will that do internally to their organization, to the army that they say they're trying to build? It's so very upsetting. I don't have to tell you how upsetting it is just watching this. It's horrific.